Normally, I only take video requests from members of the channel, but somebody pitched an idea that they would like to see, and I thought, ooh, that will actually probably be really fun to make. That idea was the order in which you should buy Nikon Z mount lenses, in the style of a ranking video. Since I have no idea how I would arrange that, and as we can see, Marin is getting huge. She's on the ground, she's not in my lap. Oh, that was a nice stretch. Since I have no idea how I would arrange that, except for the very first lens you should buy, that's the Nikkor Z 50mm f1.8s, it sounds like a fun opportunity to think deeper about Nikon lenses, so I'm gonna do it. And by the way, after finishing this script, I had to come back and add this. That 50mm f1.8s may not apply anymore. It's certainly not a blanket statement. I began sculpting the idea and ran into a problem right off the bat. Genre. Damn it. The video is basically impossible to rank every Nikon Z lens in order of which you should buy it. Not as many people start photography with an interest in fast action that need a super telephoto, but they actually are out there, so my top recommendation isn't going to fly for them. Furthermore, in that case, the cost of entry is so much higher even for the affordable options, so there really was no way for me to do this other than breaking it apart into a few sections. People who are collectors, people who are just doing photography for photography, we'll call them new generalists, and telephoto people. Comment below if in the future you'd like me to cover the order in which you should buy for other specific genres or interests. How I'm arranging these lenses today is going to be a little more nuanced than I thought it needed to be, for the sake of entertainment and sensibility. So each of these three categories come with some specifics that I will cover before jumping into the order. Finally, this video is brought to you in part by real camera stores like Adorama and B&H, both of which I'm affiliated with. Link in the description because this video is going to take many days to record and probably 20 hours to edit. Thank you in advance for subscribing, liking, becoming a member, and using those links. This might be the least nuanced category, so let's run it first. So because action can range from Little League sports to pro sports and from wildlife at the zoo to a full-blown safari, I'm actually considering pretty much anything that does 200mm and over, because 200mm can work at your kids' sports events. They're going to be picking flowers for their mothers instead of playing the game anyway, and yes, that's how I played Little League Baseball, because I was a sweet kid who got bored easily. Also, I'm going to pretend that your goal is to someday do some high-level photography adventures, so our options are the 24-200 f4 to 6.3, the 28-400 f4 to f8, the 180-600 f5.6, 6.3, the 70-200mm f2.8, the 100-400 f4.5 5.6 VRS, the 400mm f4.5, the 600mm f6.3, the 400mm f2.8 TC VRS, the 800mm f6.3, and the 600mm f4 TC VRS. First things first, let's get rid of anything that I would not recommend to anyone in this category. The 24-200, shockingly, I would almost recommend to someone in this niche who has zero experience with photography, just as something for them to learn on, as long as they can get one for a good price used, because it's a dirty dog of a lens for what Nikon priced it at brand new. For not much more money, a better lens to call your first lens would be the 28-400 f4 to f8. This lens is a bit tougher to use with the variable aperture, but since you have zero experience, this is a more versatile option, and it's really just temporary. You're using this lens to learn about photography, and its drawbacks will probably make you a better photographer when you finally upgrade. Now it's time to upgrade from your first lens, and there is a really important fork in the road coming up before things get outrageously expensive for telephoto folks. So now that you have some photography skill built up, the second lens you should get is the Nikkor Z 180-600mm f5.6 to 6.3 VR. Not only is it an upgrade in versatility on the long end, the variable aperture of f5.6 to 6.3 just makes this lens better in my opinion and not painful to shoot at all. This lens has a very important lesson to teach you that will determine what happens next. You should really pay attention in the field or review the data in your photo editing software over the course of many photo adventures to see if you find yourself more around the 400mm or 600mm focal range. This is where we have our fork in the road. If you find yourself in the 400mm range more often, then your third lens should be the 400mm f4.5 VRS. If you find yourself more in the 600mm range, then your third lens would be the 600mm f6.3 VRS. This is an exciting place to be because we have now officially entered into S-line Nikkor lenses, which come with some nice perks, like superior optical designs and the best coatings that Nikon has to offer. And that means a better correction of optical issues like chromatic aberration, flaring, and such, and generally just sharper and better images, better contrast, etc., etc. Do not be swayed by the differences in aperture or the price differences. Remember that you based this direction you're going down in this fork on the focal length that you usually find yourself around. You know what you need, and now is the time to commit to the path that will serve you the best most of the time. There's absolutely no reason you can't go back and buy the other at some point if you want to. There's something special here to consider before we continue to the moment where you opt out of paying for your child's college. The next step on the path is obvious, but you should consider that a lot of photographers have actually opted to stick to the 400 4.5 and the 600 6.3. In the case of the 400, I hear more often it just comes down to weight savings being worth it. But in the case specifically of the 600 6.3, I've heard more than once from wildlife photographers with lots of experience that I don't have with super telephotos that after using both the 600 f6.3 and the 600 f4 TC VRS, that the 6.3 is not only lighter, but the image quality is so good that it's not even a conversation between the two. Save the weight and the money and go 600 f6.3. If they need a teleconverter, just buy a teleconverter because the nearly $11,000 difference just isn't there for the weight and the image quality. Anyway, if you have over 10 grand by this point in your career and you want to do some serious adventures with technically the best of the best, obviously, if you went down the 400mm path, then the 400 f2.8 TC VRS is where you go. And if you're down the 600mm path, the final upgrade is the 600mm f4 TC VRS. But it's not the last purchase because there are still a few lenses left from the list. I'm not tossing out the 70 to 200, 100 to 400, or the 800mm. They just kind of have special cases. If you decide that you're not really wanting to go into wildlife and you're really more into like motorsports or something, then the 100 to 400 can fit as your second lens after you've learned the ropes on the 28 to 400. And actually, it can probably be your last purchase. The 70 to 200, on the other hand, kind of works as a secondary lens if you go down the sports path. So having something like the 180 to 600 and the 70 to 200 can be a pretty great sports setup. So if that's where you are after the 180 to 600, your next and possibly last purchase could be the 70 to 200. Now, if you continue down the 400 to 600mm path, regardless of whether you choose to upgrade to the $10,000 lenses or not, the actual final purchase is the 800mm f6.3 VRS. Why? Well, I know very few people who frequent 800mm. They are out there though, like small birders and those kinds of people. This scenario is kind of get the most used focal length done first, and if you need it or if you just want something longer at some point, then you get the 800. But it does merge our fork back together for a final start to finish. So the order is the 28 to 400 f4 to f8, the 180 to 600 f5.6, 6.3. If you're a 400 person, the 400mm f4.5. If you're a 600mm person, the 600mm f6.3. 400 people then proceed to the 400mm f2.8 TC VRS. 600mm people proceed to the 600mm f4 TC VRS. And then we all come together again as friends with the 800mm f6.3 VRS. So I want to go over the order of purchase for the collector. I kind of used to be a quasi-collector, but I never had the money to collect the way I wanted to. So to arrange these lenses, I'm going to pretend that the collector in the audience has a very strong income and wants to Pokemon the Z mount. Gotta catch 'em all. Gotta catch 'em all. I wanna be the very best. That's all I can do without catching a lawsuit. I'm also including the DX lenses in this list because a real collector probably wants all of them. Finally, even though this is a lens video, just for fun, I want to challenge myself further and try to do some financial finessing for the collector who might want all of the cameras too. If the collector in the audience doesn't want the cameras, just ignore it because I'd probably still get the lenses in the same order. The very first lens a collector should get is the 24-120 f4, and you can get it in a kit with the Z8. Two birds with one stone. The lens comes at a discount in this kit, and you have a camera that's way more powerful than you'll ever need, and a really great lens that does just about everything. So even the collector can start shooting photography today. Since money is no object, I think it's important to go ahead and get the 58mm 0.95 knocked sooner than later. The lens is actually considered limited, and I don't know what that means or how many are made or will be made. Maybe they will always be around, but it sounds more collectible, and maybe they won't always be around, so get it sooner. Next, since we already have a named lens, or exotic as they are called, you might as well go ahead and get the only one that exists besides the Noct at this point, the Nikkor Z 135 f1.8s Plena. For no reason other than the yellow scribble on the side draws more attention, and that's important to collectors. A collector may find themselves wanting to offset the cost of collecting at this point because they are $14,690.85 in with one camera and 3 lenses. So they are going to start taking on some paid work. Luckily for them, 3 birds with 1 stone. I saw a kit on B&H that comes with the Z9, the 28-75 f2.8, and the 70-180 f2.8. Now you have 2 cameras and 2 of the most important lenses for most types of work, including events and portrait sessions. Next, you'll complete the affordable trinity with the 17-28 f2.8. Now, because it's just absolutely incredible and everyone should own it, not just collectors, you add some premium quality to your wide-angle game with the Nikkor Z 20mm f1.8s. The collector still doesn't have a way to experiment with wildlife and sports, so next you'll get the 180-600 f5.6 to 6.3 VR, followed by the 400mm f4.5 VRS shortly thereafter. To get the prime experience at the top end of that 180 to 600mm range, the 600mm f6.3 VRS comes next. Since we are still early in collecting and to help continue offsetting costs, we'll grab the nifty little kit that is the Nikon Z30 and 12-28 power zoom. Start a YouTube channel and start documenting the collecting journey. The collector is getting bored with wildlife and realizes that they don't have an easy prime setup. So next they are going to grab the 50mm f1.8s and the MC105 f2.8 VRS. Now it's time to get into the f1.2 game because they are all premium lenses and you're a collector. You like that kind of thing. To be honest, you can do this in any order that you want, but personally, I would go 50mm 1.2, 85mm 1.2, and 35mm 1.2 because, you know, it's the most versatile, most optically stunning, and both optically stunning and only slightly less versatile. The collector decides to get more into wide-angle stuff, and the 17-28 from earlier isn't cutting it, so an upgrade/add to the collection would next be the Nikkor Z 14-28mm f2.8s. After witnessing how majestic that lens is, you decide to spring for the rest of the premium trinity with the 24-70 f2.8s first, because it's better than the 70-200 f2.8 VRS that follows. There is a 24-70 f2.8 kit option on B&H that comes with the Z7 II, which I didn't know was an option at all. I'm almost 100% that kit isn't from Nikon. I think retailers are just kit bashing, but savings is savings. You decide to get into some paid video work for more offsetting of the costs, and you bought the Z9 earlier, so next let's get the 28-135 f4PZ, which is actually optimized for the Z9. You find yourself in wanting of a new camera, so you snag a Nikon ZF with the 40mm f2 SE. That's the retro looking one. You follow that with another retro looking setup, the ZFC with the 28mm f2.8 SE. Since we are here, the non-retro ones are the same optically, and I'll just go ahead and throw them in the same order here. It's 40mm first and 28mm non-SE. You realize the 28 f2.8 is pretty good, but you want something really sweet. So you go to zwadephoto.com/theopticexplorer and you see how highly I ranked the 26mm f2.8 and you get that. Let me take a breather here. It was at this point in the scripting that I realized I was about halfway through and kind of not really knowing where to go next. The remaining lenses are either real expensive or would kind of just be collected to be collected, but the collector has already got something in the range, so I don't know what to do. The collector has just about everything they could need, so now it just comes down to finishing the collection. So why not just finish most of the wide-angle stuff that's worth owning, the 14-30 f4s followed by the 24mm f1.8s. Let's get a couple of convenient lenses on the shelf. The 28-400 f4 to f8 VR for a vacation if you go on one, and the MC 50mm f2.8 for one lens to just go and do stuff from macro to food to portraits. Next, a lens that honestly could have been bought a long time ago because it rocks, but we were waiting to justify another camera that we didn't need to get a discount on a lens. We grab a Nikon Z6 III with the 24-70 f4s. Following that, we knock out a couple of missing 1.8s primes that we don't need. The 85 f1.8s and the 35mm f1.8s in that order. Another weird kit bash, a Nikon Z6 II with a 50mm f1.4. So we get a little discount and then you can follow that with a full price 35mm f1.4. Enough primes and new cameras. Let's grab an outlier zoom that might be a little more convenient for some types of action. The 100-400mm f4.5 to 5.6 VRS. Now the collector is really just filling in the blanks. So let's grab the original Z50 two-lens kit that comes with the DX50-250 f4.5 to 6.3 VR and the 16-50 f3.5 to 6.3 VR. And since there is a silver version of the 16-50, you're a freak collector, you go ahead and grab that too. Since there are basically no options in DX for Nikon mirrorless, you go ahead and finish off the DX portion of the collection with the DX24 f1.7 followed by the 18-140 and a kit with the Z52. DX is done. Ain't you a successful little collector? Now back to some crazy priced things. You have the 400 and 600 already, so now why not go ahead and just get the 800mm f6.3 VRS. After this, you can pick your poison over $10,000. Personally, I would go the 400 2.8 first and then the 600mm TC VRS. 3 cameras and 2 lenses left. You can still get the original Z5 kit with the 24-50 f4 to 6.3, so get that before they stop having that altogether. There are no more kits that I can find for the remaining cameras, so whatever, if you want the cameras, the Z6, Z7, Z6 II, you get those whenever. And the final lens you should add to your collection, or not, is the remarkable, and how gross it is, 24-200 f4 to 6.3 VR. I hope I didn't miss anything. So the order for the collector is the 24-120 f4, the 58 knocked, followed by the Plena, the 28-75 and 70-180 at the same time, 17-28, the 20mm f1.8s, the 180-600, the 400-4.5, the 600-6.3, the 12-28 power zoom, the 50mm f1.8s, the MC 105 f2.8 VRS, the 50mm 1.2, the 85mm 1.2, the 35 1.2, the 14-28 f2.8s, the 24-70 f2.8s, the 70-200 f2.8 VRS, the 28-135 PZ, the 40mm f2, the 28 f2.8, the 26 f2.8, the 14-30 f4s, the 24 f1.8s, the 28-400 f4 to f8, the MC 50mm f2.8, the 24-70 f4s, the 85 f1.8s, the 35 f1.8s, the 50-1.4 followed by the 35-1.4, the 100-400 4.5 5.6 VRS, the DX 50-250, the DX 16-50, the DX 24 f1.7, the DX 18-140, the 800mm f6.3, the 400mm f2.8, the 600mm f4, the 24-50 f4.5 to 6.3, and the 24-200 f4 to 6.3 VR. Honestly, very little rhyme or reason to that about halfway down or so. Good thing people with bottomless wallets collecting Z-mount lenses are non-existent and, or at the very least, the smallest part of my YouTube audience. That was an absolute slog. A little side note, as I was scripting the script, at this point is when I realized I was at the bottom of page 6 of the script. So if this dedication doesn't get you to subscribe, then I just don't know what more you want from a free video. This might be my longest video ever, aside from like a live stream. Welcome to page 7. The final section of this monumental task is actually probably what the subscriber that recommended this idea meant. In this segment, I'm going to consider a new generalist someone who is new to the Z-mount and dabbles in a lot of things, which I think is a lot of us. Just a love of the game. No aspirations for the craziest lenses for the most niche of genres. People who just want to shoot. Considering there aren't many DX lens options, and because I always recommend people start the Z-mount in full frame anyway, with the cost of entry being so much lower than it was in the F-mount days, I'm not considering any DX lenses in this segment. That being said, there are a lot of lenses that just need to be set aside for now, but not necessarily removed from consideration because who knows how far your interests may go. There also are probably some lenses that I just wouldn't really bother with, honestly. So let's remove some and we will explain why later. The 58 Noct, the 400-8, the 600 f4, the 100-400, the 28-75 and 17-28 f2.8s, the MC 50mm, the 35 f1.8s, the 24-50, the 28 f2.8, the 24-200, and the 28-135 f4PZ for photo folks, and the 35 and 50mm f1.4s for photographers. Right off the bat, we have to settle a fork in the road. Some people may be more interested in casual video, though probably fewer than people interested in casual photography. If you're on the video side, I would get the 24 f1.8s first, just simply because it's a really dang good prime. I would follow that with the 50-1.4, then the 35-1.4. Why? Well, the focus breathing on these 1.4s is pretty minimal. Focus is fairly silent, and even though I'm not a fan of them because they have some optical drawbacks, those drawbacks may actually be better for video, like how they aren't clinically sharp, and that's probably better for your video. Now from there, the only other thing I'd upgrade to is the 28-135 power zoom. It's just straight up awesome, and obviously intended for solo video people. The last lens you might consider for some types of video is the 180-600 f5.6 to 6.3 VR. Now we can continue our way down the photography fork. I've said for years that everyone's first Nikkor Z mount lens should be the Nikkor Z 50mm f1.8s. It's a 50mm, so of course it's versatile enough to get you started, and equally important, it is an excellent representation of what you can expect from Nikon mirrorless lenses, specifically the S line. However, if you don't have a Z camera yet, you should get a Z camera that comes with the 24-70 f4S because you'll get it at a discount. Next, to get you even more versatility, you add a zoom. The amazing 24-120 f4S followed by the MC 105 f2.8 VRS. Now you're doing macro and portraits, but you're not quite wide enough for architecture and astro, so next we add the 14-30 f4S. We've got a lot of territory to cover, but we need something on the long end. The 180-600 f5.6 to 6.3 VR is the obvious choice, I think. But in the side chance that maybe you're going on a vacation soon and you want to take only one lens period, then you really have no choice but to add the 28-400 f4 to f8. If you didn't get the 24-70 f4S earlier, get it right here. But if you did, the next lens you might consider is the 70-180 f2.8. You have a mix-match trinity now, so congratulations. That is why I tossed the 17-28 and the 28-75 f2.8s earlier. The 14-30 f4 gets you wider, which can make or break some genres, and the 24-70 f4s, they're just optically better than the 28-75 and the 17-28. There is no other option in the telephoto range, so that's why the 70-180 got to stay. I think now is a good time to talk about 35mm primes. I already tossed the 35-1.4 for the photographers because it's not that good and it's kind of overpriced. Well, the same kind of goes for the 35mm f1.8s. Not that it isn't a good optic, it's definitely fairly solid, it's just overpriced. And I think the much cheaper and optically awesome option would be the 40mm f2, which should be next. It's close enough to 35mm, so just deal with it. The 20mm f1.8s is a little more on the expensive side, but by taking this recommendation next, you will officially own one of the most incredible optical creations the Z mount has to offer, and now you have a fast wide prime, the widest Nikon has at the making of this video. Now might be a good time to grab a prime specifically for portraits. After all, YouTube convinced you that f2.8 isn't good enough when it totally is for portraits. Grab the 85mm f1.8s, but please do so used, because new price on it, I've always felt, is just a tad higher than it should be. Maybe now it's time to consider upgrading your trinity to the S-line f2.8 lenses. If you do, the order I would go in, because of usefulness, is the 24-70, then the 70-200, and finally the 14-24 f2.8s. If you primary landscape photography and such, feel free to swap the 70-200 and the 14-24. Realistically, we can probably stop there, but I didn't necessarily want to throw out the remaining lenses into a wouldn't recommend category, and unfortunately that created more directions that we could go that I didn't really want to, but I have to. If, as a generalist, you find yourself not interested in wildlife and sports and such, then you have a choice to make. 135 plana or 85 1.2. The output is really similar. The 135 is kind of unique in its bokeh, the 85 I think has unbelievable tonal transitions, and it is my preference. You really can't go wrong with either, so just make the choice and don't bother getting the other one. Then, just for fun, because it's tiny and awesome, grab the 26mm f2.8 before upgrading your 40mm f2 to the 35mm f1.2s, and finally upgrading your 50mm f1.8s to the 50mm f1.2s. Let's recap the order real quick, then briefly explain why I excluded certain lenses. For video people, we have the 24 f1.8s first, followed by the 50mm f1.4, then the 35mm f1.4, and then you do it all with the 28-135 power zoom. In case you decide to do wildlife video, the 180-600. For the photo folks, the 50mm f1.8s or the 24-70 f4s if you don't have a camera, 24-120 f4s, MC105 f2.8 VRS, 14-30 f4s, 180-600 5.6 to 6.3 VR, the 28-400 f4 to f8 only if you're planning on having just one lens period or something, or you're going on vacation. Otherwise, I wouldn't get it at all. The 24-70 f4s if you opted to start with the 50mm f1.8s, the 70-180 f2.8, the 40mm f2, the 20mm f1.8s, the 85mm f1.8s, the 24-70 f2.8s, the 70-200mm f2.8 VRS, and the 14-28mm f2.8. We had the fork in the road, non-wildlife people, the 135 f1.8s plana or the 85mm f1.2, your choice, followed by the 26mm f2.8, followed by the 35mm f1.2s, and finally the 50mm f1.2s. Now for wildlife people. Decide if you are more often around 400 or 600 and buy accordingly. The 400mm f4.5 or the 600mm f6.3 if you want to upgrade at all. Wow, I just finished a 128 gig card shooting 4K 60, so we're about 45 minutes in. This will be fun to edit. Now, what about the lenses I would not consider for photography folks? The 24 f1.8s is great, but it feels more like a video lens, and the 26mm is close enough and just a ton of fun and a good optic for less money. The 35 1.4 and f1.8s. The 1.8 is just okay and overpriced, and the 1.4 is not as good and is only $100 less than the 1.8, so it's overpriced too. The 40mm I recommend is a great lens and is way cheaper than both. The 28 f2.8, it's cheap and it's an okay lens, but again, 26mm is better, smaller, lighter, more fun, and not that much more money. The 28 to 135 PZ, I consider it more for video, and it's really expensive. The Trinity lenses are better optically and a better photo-focused investment. The 400mm f2.8 and the 600mm f4, super cool, but over $10,000, and that just isn't realistic for regular folk. It's unrealistic and also not necessary. In fact, I know several photographers who can afford them both and actually prefer the 400-4.5 and 600-6.3 because they are just easier to physically manage. And it also says a lot about the optics of the 4.5 and 6.3. The 58 Noct is wildly expensive and very, very niche. It's not even necessary outside of reproduction work, really. The 800mm f6.3 actually exists in this superposition of totally unlikely that you'll need it, or maybe it's an early purchase. It all depends on the type of wildlife you like. Small birds, that lens is pretty important. Otherwise, I don't know anyone in person that needs an 800mm lens. The 100 to 400 4.5 5.6 is pretty good optically, but not better enough than the 180 to 600 that I'd find it necessary. Would you rather have 200mm on the top end or 80mm on the bottom? I think that the 180 to 600 is excellent optically, and I wouldn't miss the 100 to 400, but that lens is more useful in some genres like motorsports and such. I guess I'll kind of leave that one up to you at the end of the day. The 28 to 75 and 17 to 28 got 86'd because I think the 24 to 70 and 14 to 30 f4S lenses are better enough to offset the difference in aperture. The MC 50mm f2.8 made it here because it's okay, but the 50mm f1.8S is just better, and so is the 105 macro. You just don't need another 50mm lens in this list that I built. The 24 to 50 f4.5 to 6.3 is a totally serviceable lens, but it's a really awkward focal range, and 50mm f6.3 is annoying. You'd never buy a 50mm f6.3 prime, would you? I wouldn't. The 24 to 200 f4 to 6.3 VR is a real bastard at its price. If you want versatility, get the 28 to 400 f4 to f8. It at least has good color rendering. Finally, the 50 and 35mm f1.4 lenses, neither of them are that good optically, and they shouldn't be the price that they are. I see the use case for them for some video folks, but the 40mm f2 is actually better optically than the 35 for certain, so I think it's just a better choice. And again, in my list, you do not need another 50, so the 51.4 is out too. And that, my friends, is page 10 of the script. Support the slog that this was by subscribing to the channel, becoming a member, even if only for 1 month, and shop the links in the description. I'm 𝑧Wade, the 𝑧Wade, and 𝑧Wade Photo. Stay sharp, YouTube.